General Hospital will reveal. While whispers and speculation about Michael's condition continued to float around in quiet corners of the internet, life in Port Charles marched on, cold and indifferent, as if he had never existed. The silence was deafening, a collective neglect masked beneath the busyness of daily lives. Everyone seemed absorbed in their own worlds, chasing personal goals, battling private wars, and losing sight of the agony unfolding thousands of miles away. Michael, once the heart of so many lives, had become an afterthought. He lay somewhere in a sterile medical facility in Germany, suspended between life and death, while the people who once vowed to never leave his side slowly let go without even realizing it. Carly was swept away in the intoxicating haze of her new romance with Brennan. It was a love that brought her warmth and escape, a sweetness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. In Brennan's arms, she found a sense of safety and indulgence that numbed her motherly instincts. The woman who once moved heaven and earth to protect her son had now let weeks go by without a single call to check on him. The guilt was buried under soft touches, candlelit dinners, and whispered promises of a future far removed from pain. Jason, once Michael's unshakable pillar of support, was now deep in the shadows of the criminal underworld. Secret missions and volatile dealings consumed his every thought. Though he still carried a flicker of concern for Michael, he too had convinced himself that things would work out, that Michael was strong enough to endure. He couldn't afford to be vulnerable, not now, not with so much at stake. So he stayed silent. Sasha, pregnant and trying to rebuild her life, clung desperately to hope. Her days were filled with business meetings and preparing for the child she believed would grow up with Michael beside her. She painted their future in her mind with vivid colors, refusing to let the uncertainty sink in. She needed to believe he would return, that their love and their child would be enough to bring him home. Even Sonny, a man once defined by the ferocity with which he protected his family, had begun to drift. His worsening heart condition, coupled with the pressure of secret negotiations and dangerous enemies, forced him to retreat from the emotional weight of Michael's condition. The man who once prided himself on never missing a beat when it came to his children, now found himself distant, watching from afar, convincing himself there would be time later to make it right. But the universe had other plans. The call came late at night. Static, foreign accents, and then, 3 words that shattered everything. Michael was dead. Just like that, the illusion collapsed. Sonny's world imploded in an instant. His knees gave out beneath him as if the ground itself had betrayed him. The pain didn't come from his weakening heart, it came from the soul. His son, his pride, the boy he raised through war and storm, was gone. Gone without warning. Gone without goodbye. His chest tightened, not from illness, but from grief so raw it stole the air from his lungs. Carly, upon hearing the news, dissolved into uncontrollable sobs. Brennan's comforting touch felt foreign now, unwelcome, even. The warmth that once enveloped her in their romance now felt like a cruel reminder of what she'd allowed herself to forget. Memories of Michael surged back like crashing waves, his laughter, his childhood cries, the way he used to say, "Mom," when he was scared. Carly had chosen escape over vigilance, love over responsibility, and now she was left with nothing but regret. Sasha's world collapsed in a way no one could have predicted. The moment she heard of Michael's death, a devastating pain gripped her body. The stress, the heartbreak, the unbearable loss. It all culminated in a tragedy no mother should endure. She lost the baby. The child that was supposed to be a symbol of hope, a piece of Michael she could hold on to, was gone. 2 lives extinguished in one cruel moment. She curled into herself, unable to move, unable to scream. The silence in her heart was louder than any funeral march. Those who once claimed to love Michael were now forced to confront the truth: they had left him alone. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. They had moved on too quickly, chased fleeting distractions, and ignored the cries of a soul hanging on by threads. Now, they were left with nothing but memories, and not the kind that brought comfort, but the ones that haunted. Michael's death didn't just mark the end of a life. It marked the unraveling of a family. A reckoning. A collective mourning steeped in guilt, in what-ifs, in the unbearable truth that they had let go too soon. They would carry this wound forever. A scar that would never fully heal. A name they would whisper in the dark, hoping for forgiveness that may never come. The pain did not end with Michael's death. It deepened, spiraled, and took with it yet another precious life. Sasha, the woman carrying his child, the woman who once looked to the future with cautious hope, was shattered the moment the news reached her. Her hands trembled as her world came crashing down, her body weakened under the weight of unbearable grief. The emotional devastation was too great, too immediate, and too cruel. It stole not only her spirit, but the fragile life growing within her. Sasha suffered a miscarriage, alone and inconsolable, robbed of both the man she loved and the child who was supposed to keep part of him alive. What was once a promise of healing had now become a graveyard of dreams. The child she and Michael had imagined together, held close in hushed conversations, whispered to in the quiet of night, was gone. That tiny heartbeat, once a symbol of renewal and resilience, faded into silence. Sasha was left with an emptiness that no one could fill. Her arms ached for both Michael and their unborn child, but all she could hold was the hollow echo of what could have been. Those who had once turned away, consumed by careers, romances, and responsibilities, began to understand, far too late, the true cost of indifference. The missed calls, the forgotten messages, the unspoken worries, they all weighed heavy now. Michael's death was no longer just the tragic end of one life, but a devastating rupture in the hearts of those who had failed to be there when it mattered most. This wasn't just the loss of a son, a lover, or a father-to-be. It was the unraveling of connection, the irreversible consequence of looking away. Every person who had once loved Michael now carried a fracture in their soul, a guilt that bloomed slowly into sorrow. Love, when neglected, does not quietly fade. It shatters, leaving behind only regret and the painful knowledge that love unexpressed is sometimes love lost forever. Jason and Sonny, two men who had always stood at the center of Michael's life, were no longer paralyzed by grief. Instead, they were fueled by a burning rage and an unrelenting determination to seek justice for the son they both loved as their own. The pain of Michael's death was still fresh, still bleeding beneath the surface, but it no longer numbed them. It sharpened them. Jason moved like a shadow, silent and deadly, diving into the underworld with calculated precision, tracking names, tracing footsteps, following whispers that led back to a man no one dared to speak of, Salisky. Sonny, despite his weakening heart and fragile health, was equally relentless. This was no longer about control or power, it was personal. He immersed himself in dark channels, reached out to old contacts across Europe and Africa, and pieced together a chilling truth. Salisky wasn't just some nameless assassin, he was a pyro expert, a ghost who specialized in making death look like an accident. His signature was fire and silence. And when Sonny compared the reports from Michael's tragic explosion with the known patterns in Salisky's past operations, the match was undeniable. For a moment, Sonny thought he had found clarity. The villain had a name. The enemy had a face. But the revelation brought no relief. It couldn't undo the reality. Michael was gone. Permanently. Exposing Salisky now meant little more than pouring salt into an open wound. The truth had come too late. And that was what destroyed Sonny all over again. He had found the devil, but the angel he wanted to save had already been lost. Meanwhile, Brennan, Carly's current partner, received a coded message with vital information about Salisky's movements. The contents were clear, urgent, and dangerous. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Brennan approached Sonny privately and asked him to stand down, to trust that he would handle it from here. There was no arrogance in Brennan's request, only the calculated concern of a man who knew exactly how high the stakes had become. Sonny, however, remained eerily quiet when Brennan mentioned Salisky's recent disappearance in Toronto. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even seem surprised. And that told Brennan everything he needed to know. Sonny already knew. He had been one step ahead, digging in the shadows long before Brennan arrived. That silence wasn't ignorance. It was grief soaked in vengeance. Still, Brennan chose to share a few key details. He explained that Salisky had a preference for incendiary devices, powerful, precise, and hard to trace. The man had been involved in operations across Africa, Eastern Europe, and more recently, Canada. Wherever Salisky went, chaos followed, but nothing could ever be pinned on him. He was a ghost, and chasing him would mean following a trail of ashes and lies. Later, when Brennan returned to the dinner table with Carly, his demeanor had shifted, controlled, but tense. Carly noticed immediately. She searched his face, read his eyes, and though Brennan offered a casual explanation that it was just WSB business, her instincts screamed otherwise. She had lived too long around secrets to be fooled so easily. Something darker was brewing, something more than government affairs and classified missions. There was a storm on the horizon, and Carly could feel it creeping closer with every breath. For now, she said nothing. But her heart, once lost in romantic warmth, was beginning to wake up. The woman who had once fought for her son with unmatched fury now felt a pulse of purpose returning. She could no longer afford to be distracted by kisses and candlelight. Michael's name was echoing louder than ever in her mind. And somewhere deep in that echo, justice was taking shape. Sonny wouldn't stop, not for his health, not for peace, not for anyone. Jason was already in motion, Brennan was circling closer, and Carly's doubt had shifted into focus. Salisky had left behind a trail soaked in fire and blood. And though Michael was gone, his death would not be in vain. Not if the people who truly loved him still had breath in their lungs. Because justice, now, wasn't just a choice. It was a promise. As the weight of Michael's death finally settled over Port Charles like a dark, inescapable fog, a chilling realization began to seep into the hearts of those who had once called him family, friend, or ally. The town, so often wrapped in its own whirlwind of secrets, scandals, and self-absorbed pursuits, had turned away, willingly or not, from the one person who had desperately needed their presence, their love, and their voices. And now, with his absence echoing louder than any of their excuses, the remorse and anguish began to spread like a silent plague. The video calls that once offered fleeting moments of comfort, the brief check-ins that had felt good enough at the time, were now nothing more than painful memories. Those promises, "I'll visit soon, we're thinking of you, you're not alone," now carried the weight of betrayal, not because they were lies, but because they were never fulfilled. They were pushed aside for meetings, for new romances, for unresolved grudges and personal agendas. They were buried beneath distractions, lost in the noise of daily life. No one meant to abandon Michael, but in the end, that's exactly what happened. The hospital room in Germany where Michael had once drawn shallow breaths and clung silently to life was now just a symbol of what everyone chose to ignore. It stood as a monument to a town's quiet failure. An uncomfortable truth no one wanted to face until it was far too late. No longer could they tell themselves there was still time. There were no more calls to make, no letters to write, no visits to schedule. The chance to be there for Michael had come and gone, and with it, so had the young man who had brought light into so many lives. Michael, who had once been a source of stability and strength, was now just a name spoken with trembling voices. He had been the boy with a golden heart, the man who carried burdens with quiet dignity, the soul who stood firm even when the world around him crumbled. He was a beacon to those drowning in their own chaos, a voice of reason, a source of hope. And yet, when he needed hope the most, no one had truly been there. Now, his story haunted the town like a ghost. Every corner of Port Charles held echoes of him, his smile, his laughter, the sound of his footsteps on the docks, his presence in Kelly's, the warmth he brought to family dinners. His absence wasn't just a void, it was a mirror reflecting everyone's failure. A shared guilt that couldn't be washed away with condolences or flowers. The people of Port Charles didn't just lose Michael, they lost a part of themselves. The most tragic part wasn't that he died, but that he died feeling forgotten. And so, he became more than a memory. Michael became a warning. A reminder of what happens when love is assumed, not expressed. When care is promised, but never shown. When people wait until it's too late to say what matters. His death served as a painful reckoning, a piercing lesson for a town too distracted by its own dramas to notice a hero quietly fading away. Michael was gone. But the silence he left behind screamed louder than any goodbye.